about Asian food and how to make that a little bit healthier. And you know, people don't always realize what Asian food all encompasses. So it's more than, you know, your Chinese food or your sushi. It includes Indian food, Moroccan food, Filipino, a wide variety of flavors, and they're all a little bit different. And so it was really tough actually to come up with recipes for today. And just because, you know, some, you know, there's curry, there's coconut, some people love it, some people hate it. And so when you're cooking for a crowd, it's not the easiest to think of. So I went with what I thought would be the safest bet, just kind of some classic Asian dishes. I figure that's gonna hopefully make the most people happy. And really just talk a little bit about how to make each one healthier. And hopefully these are things that you would want to make at home then too. So we're actually going to do it a little bit backwards today because we have such a large crowd. I actually made all of the food first, so you guys can go and grab it, and then as I'm demoing, you can eat and enjoy versus having to smell and be tortured that way. And so I'm being kind, right? But I will, and I'm gonna like excuse myself beforehand. I broke a circuit earlier trying to cook everything over here, so I'm gonna have to maybe plug in and plug out as we go. So I apologize for that. But go ahead and get in line. I have Asian glazed chicken thighs, a veggie stir fry with broccoli and almond, peppers, onions, mushrooms, and then a skinny stir fried rice. I have tongs for the chicken. How I have it, so kind of portioned out, is that everybody can have a thigh and then about a half a cup of each of the sides, just to make sure everybody has enough. And then if you want to go back afterwards, you're more than welcome to. So to kind of help with that, my serving dishes are actually half cup measuring cups, so that's why. So go ahead and you guys can get in line, and then when you do, we'll go ahead and, or when everybody has their food, we'll get started.
You should jump in something. You can do that.
I know, Carly, where did you put the handout?
Oh, on the corner table. Yeah, sorry. Once people start filling your head. Yeah, and they
We're all gonna smell like.
Oh, that's like we were
Yeah.
It was turned the other way, I can see the pie spice. I always thought it was Chinese spice.
Oh, good. Okay, so there's a little bit of food. You guys all did really good sifting to your version. There's a little bit left of everything, but don't worry too. If you are still hungry afterwards, you can come and sample. I can give out whatever I make afterwards too. So there shouldn't be a shortage for you guys if you can be a little patient. But we'll go ahead and get started since everybody has gotten their food. And I'm going to start off with the Asian glazed chicken thighs today. Okay. So you start off with this recipe. I gave you two options, skillet and slow cooker. Obviously we're doing a skillet today. And you start off by just browning the chicken in just a little bit of oil. I use 1 teaspoon. A lot of recipes call for a ton more. You really don't need it. Really you could probably get by without putting any in it at all. But what you're going to do is just brown the chicken on both sides. It takes about 3 minutes for the boneless chicken thighs. And I already did that just to save a few minutes off our time. But say that these were still cooking. While they were cooking, we're just going to mix up our glaze that goes with it. So with this, you just have a half a cup of water, some soy sauce, low sodium soy sauce, some brown sugar, because that makes everything better. Garlic is great, and I just cheat and use the minced jarred garlic that you can get, just because I'm just not good at chopping garlic. So I do that, put in a little bit of orange juice, vinegar, ketchup, which who knew this was an Asian ingredient? I guess I kind of laughed when I saw that in the recipe. I'm like, well, we have to put our American spin on it somehow. And then I put in a little bit of red pepper to give it a little zing, and then Chinese spice powder. And I brought the jar of this because a lot of people don't necessarily, maybe have not necessarily seen this before. And I was actually talking a little bit before we started class, and you know, I had never used it actually before doing this recipe. I was like, well, I'll try it, I'll buy it, and I opened the jar and it smelled like black licorice. I'm like, I don't know, this is pretty nasty stuff, but it actually just, I don't know, that cooks out and it ends up turning out really well. So if you if you have trouble finding this, look first in the ethnic aisle by all of the Asian sauces. And it should be there. If not, you can always check the spice aisle as well. If you don't have luck and cannot find it, a good sub in this recipe would just be like a spoonful of hoisin sauce instead. So it's good for getting it a little bit of flavor. Okay, so we have that all mixed together, and then our chicken is browned. So then just it's as easy as pouring it in over the chicken, and then slightly, and then cover and simmer it, let it simmer for about 10 to 20 minutes. It really just depends on the chicken because, or I'm sorry, we're gonna let it come to a boil real quick before we move on, but, and turn the heat down. But, you know, you can see like I have, one you probably noticed as you were scooping up thighs, like I have this huge one here, and I have this little guy here too. So it just kind of depends on what the chicken thigh, the size of that. Now, I did use chicken thighs, obviously. Did that shock anybody that that was in a healthy cooking class that I had that in there? So it's a little bit surprising because typically people think of, you know, I need to do chicken breast. Yeah, that's the leanest meat. And yeah, it definitely is lower in calories and fat than the dark meat. But does anybody have any guesses on, for a 4-ounce serving, so about the size of the palm of your hand, a little bit bigger, what the difference is in terms of calories and fat? Any guesses? Anybody want to entertain me? Just kidding. That's okay, I won't put anybody on the spot. For 4 ounces of chicken breast on average, it's about 120 calories. For a dark meat, whether it's a thigh or, you know, a leg, it's anywhere between 130 and 160 calories. So it's really not that far off. I mean, a little bit higher, but where you're going to get the most of the calories, fat, sodium, and such is from the skin. So as long as you take that off, that is going to be your best bet. And I did the boneless thighs just because it's easier. You don't have to worry about the bone, that sort of thing. You can get, if you can't find those, because I wiped out a couple grocery stores when I was search for all of these. You know, you can always do the bone in. It'll take a little bit longer to cook then, so you need to keep that in mind. And then another option is just to do chicken breast instead, and then just, of course, adjust the time accordingly. Okay, so now we've got this boiling. So I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. And now we're going to let it simmer for about 10 to 20 minutes. And while that is going on, we'll move over to our rice. So here's where I have to do my little switcheroo here. Alright, so just started off with some nonstick cooking spray. I'm going to let that heat up a little bit. And this was one, I mean, I kind of had to do it because I think everybody likes fried rice. So, I think, doesn't everybody? It's kind of like the first thing you think of. So, what's great about this one is that it's super easy. And again, much lower in calories than what your standard stir fry would be. So, just to kind of give you a comparison, it definitely depends on the recipe, but with stir fries, or with typical kind of fried rice recipes, the average I found was over, for 3/4 of a cup, which is what the serving is for this recipe, it can be over 200 calories. With this one, it's right around 150. So I was able to cut 100 calories out just by some little tweaks that I'll do, and I'll kind of walk through those with you. So started off just heating my skillet with some nonstick cooking spray, and we're going to scramble some eggs in here once it gets hot. Now, a lot of times, if you find a fried rice recipe, they call for you to cook the eggs in oil. And if you've ever scrambled eggs before, you know that that's not really necessary. So it was a really easy way to cut out some unnecessary calories and fat. And overall, you're not going to taste it in the end. So I just used, again, the cooking spray. And I used 2 eggs in this recipe. If you want to lighten it further, you definitely can. So typically, whether you're baking or cooking on the stovetop, you can substitute 2 egg whites for 1 whole egg, and you're going to get a similar product. So that can help further cut the calories and the fat that way, and the cholesterol as well. You can also use egg beaters instead, okay? Typically, 1/4 of a cup of egg beaters equals 1 whole egg, okay? One note in baking note is that you need to at least have 1 whole egg in there, just because the yolk does have functional properties that way. Okay, so we're getting our egg cooked. Here's going a little slow. Almost there. And then once this is cooked, we're just going to take it out and set it off to the side. Typically, the smaller you can scramble these, the better. I know you kind of had some maybe big chunks in your stir fry today, but it was hard to try to cook that many eggs and get them all into little crumbles. So my apologies if there are slightly larger. All right. Next step is we are going to saute some veggies in a little bit of oil, okay? So I have sesame oil here that I'm putting in there, and then I'm also putting in some garlic, onions, and some frozen peas and carrots. So really easy that way. That chopping the onion takes maybe a couple of minutes. You should have seen me yesterday though. It was pretty funny. It was the red onions with the stir fry that got me into trouble. I was just crying. I was cutting up like 8 onions and it was just like waterworks. It was awful. So today I'm doing a little bit better. But we're just gonna stir fry this for about 2 to 3 minutes until the vegetables start to get a little crisp tender, so the onions start to get a little yellow. Now, a couple things that I did here to make the recipe healthier is I cut way back on the amount of oil that was used, okay? So I just used, how much did I use? Not very much, maybe a tablespoon and a half, which there's usually call for much more than that. You really don't need that much again. This was more than enough to cover all of these vegetables. What you can do too is just start small with a little bit, and then if you need to add more, you can. Another trick that I use, not just with stir frying, but really anytime that I'm sauteing vegetables, if it's for a chili or something, is I will just add a little bit of low sodium chicken broth or beef broth, or you can do the vegetable broth, and that will, so a little bit of oil, a little bit of broth, and that's gonna cut way back on the amount of calories that you have. Now, some people wonder, what about the sodium in the broth? Typically, it's such a small amount, you're not going to really contribute a whole lot of sodium to it. So, not a big deal there. And then another thing that I did is I upped the veggie content from what typical recipes would call for. Anytime that you can add more vegetables in, that's going to reduce the calorie density of the recipe. So by calorie density, I mean number of calories in each bite, okay? So, plus I think that veggies really got good texture and flavor to it. So, that is starting to get yellow, so we're going to go on to our next step and just add a few cups of cooked and cooled brown rice. Okay, and we're just going to cook this for a couple minutes. Now, notice that I said cooked and cooled. Some recipes will call for you to do it the day before, but I mean, I don't typically think that far ahead to do the day before, so as long as you cook it and cool it, you're good to go. What I will do is, well, there's a couple different things you can do. Is I'll just stick it in the refrigerator and kind of stir it regularly and let it cool if I'm cooking it up that day. Or you can get like a jelly roll pan and spread it thinly through there, and then it's going to cool off a lot faster. Okay, so that's kind of the tip there. You'll notice that I use brown rice. So again, another thing to make this healthier, brown rice is a whole grain, so it's going to help up the fiber content of just the dish in general. The veggies help with that as well. You can also do wild rice, okay? That's also a whole grain that people don't necessarily realize that. Or you can also do like me. Sometimes I'll sub quinoa for rice. It's typically, a South American food, but I mean, I'll make it kind of a blend of different cultures. Quinoa, has anybody ever tried that before? It's kind of a new trendy grain. Really, you can substitute it for rice in really any recipe, and it's going to be smaller granules. It's going to have a slight nutty flavor, but I actually prefer it over rice, and it actually is higher in protein and fiber than what brown rice is. Pricier too, so if you don't want to pay the extra for it, brown rice is totally fine. Okay, so we've cooked this for a few minutes. We definitely want to make sure that it's warm and even getting a little bit brown as we're doing it. And then just add a little bit of soy sauce here. Okay, and then we're going to just let this cook into it, let the flavors absorb for a few minutes, and get it coated. Now, I use reduced sodium soy sauce, but tell you what, that's kind of one thing that just tends to be the breaking point of a lot of Asian recipes. Any guesses on, okay, well, let's talk about daily sodium recommendations, okay? If you are under the age of 51 and have healthy blood pressure, you can have up to 2,300 milligrams of sodium each day. If you are over the age of 50 or have high blood pressure, then you need to limit it to 1,500 milligrams, okay? So we kind of have our daily totals in mind here. What do you think 1 tablespoon of regular soy sauce in terms of sodium, how much does it have in it? I didn't hear any numbers specifically.
500.
500. It's actually usually about 1,000 to 1,100. Okay, so it's a ton. And so, yeah, it can get you into trouble for sure. So you wonder why you're puffy after eating Asian food? That's why. So, a couple of things you can do. Of course, I use the reduced sodium, but that still has about 500, 550 milligrams per tablespoon. So, it helps, but another thing you could do if you wanted to lower the sodium in this recipe even further, is to just reduce how much you're using. So I used 1/4 of a cup, but you could totally get by with 2 to 3 tablespoons if you want to, because there's more than enough flavor to get through this. Okay, so that's brown, so we're just gonna stir our eggs back in then until they are warmed up, which only takes a couple of seconds, and then you're good to go there. All right. So that's done, and we will be ready for sampling here after class is done, guys. I'm gonna unplug that real quick. Cover it so it stays in. All right, we're gonna go back to our chicken. It's simmering something good here. So I'm just not gonna stir it around. It's good to turn the chicken. Occasionally I kind of forgot that while I was talking to you guys, but it's not burnt or anything, so we're fine, we're good. Okay. And I am gonna tempt this real quick. So, anybody know what the chicken poultry should be cooked to? 165. Oh, wait, that was, who cheated and looked on the recipe sheet? I think I had that. Oh, okay. I think I had it on there, darn it. So, check and see here how we're doing. And typically when I'm temping, I will find the biggest thigh, or the biggest piece of meat, whatever you're doing, and then also insert it into the thickest part, and we're sitting at like 170 and still going up, so we are good. So that means that we can finish this out. All right, so to finish, I'm just gonna mix up a little bit of cornstarch and water. And depending on how thick you like your sauce, you can add, you can skip this step. I like the sauce a little bit thicker. So, just gonna stir it up till it's nice and smooth, and then stir it in. And then just heat it back up until it comes back to a boil, which shouldn't take too terribly long, and then as soon as it's thickened, then it's ready to go. Again, just kind of to note, there is a slow cooker method as well. I have tried both and they both work great. It's just kind of, whatever floats your boat. You could really make all 3 of these recipes at the same time and have dinner ready, in like 30, 45 minutes. But sometimes it's nice not to have too many pots boiling, literally. So if you like that, the slow cooker is really great as well. So it really doesn't matter. And then just kind of coat each chicken in the sauce. So the reason that it was so saucy today is because I made it ahead of time. And so I didn't want the chicken to dry out or anything. So hopefully it wasn't dry, guys. Okay. So we've got our chicken then. Any questions so far, guys? All right. So we've got more chicken for sampling then. All right, now we will move on to our stir fry. Okay, so I'm going to start off by heating my skillet up. And again, I'm using a little bit of sesame oil here. So just give that a couple minutes to heat up. And while that is, I'm going to mix up the sauce that we're going to put in with this at the end. So for that, all right, we've got soy sauce again. I talked about how high sodium is and then that I use it in everything. We've got a little bit of, but I'm not using a ton, so just about 2 tablespoons. We've got water and cornstarch again to help this thicken up. Just a little bit of sugar. And a little bit of sesame oil. All right, so just whisk this together real quick. All right, and then we'll move on here. Let's
Question about the oil you use.
Yes.
What's the difference between like a grapeseed oil, vegetable oil, coconut oil? Like
Yeah. Actually, I'll start this going, and then we'll get because that was actually something I was going to mention why I was using the sesame and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm throwing in 4 cups of broccoli here, and I am going the simple route, just doing the frozen. I thawed it out. If you want to get fresh and chop it up, go for it. I'm not that motivated, I guess. So I'm just going to let this cook here for a few minutes. And if the skillet smells a little hot, it's just old, it's fine. I've cooked in it plenty of times. So I just had tons of skillets that I had to use. So I was getting into my old hand-me-downs and stuff. So we're gonna let that cook for a little bit. We had a question about oil here. I'm using sesame oil and basically in all of my recipes. And the reason that I'm doing that today, is because it gives a good authentic Asian flavor to it, okay? You can use vegetable or canola oil if you want to, and it's still gonna turn out good, but I just think that it really helps intensify the flavor a little bit. One thing, when you are stir frying and cooking at these high heats like this, I would not use olive oil because it doesn't necessarily hold up very well, okay? In terms of, what are the best, what are good, what are not so good. As long as it's an unsaturated fat, you're doing good, okay? So, it's the easiest way to know if it's unsaturated is by the consistency it is at room temperature, okay? So, the sesame oil, canola oil, olive oil, those are all liquid at room temperature, so that means it's unsaturated. The saturated ones are gonna be solid at room temperature, okay? So, when you think about butter or lard or coconut oil, those are all saturated fats. Now, there's been a lot of press, in the past few years about coconut oil and how it's got so many benefits from, you can put it on your hair, I've heard of swishing it around in your mouth, and then of course, it can actually have inside of your body benefits too. And, there is some research to point to that for sure, but it's still, I feel like the research is still in its infancy, and until there is more to really say that yes, this is a great oil to use, I prefer if people use the unsaturated ones. The American Heart Association still recommends limiting coconut oil. So, if you want to use a little bit here and there, that's great. But I do have some, but it's actually like body lotion that I use it for. It's great for that. So if you have dry skin, go for that. But that's kind of, my 2 cents on it. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. So, next we're going to add in some peppers and onions, okay? So, 1 red pepper, 1 red onion. Again, these take minimal time to chop up. So, just going to let this cook for a few minutes. I'm going to add in some garlic as well. So, you notice I think I've used garlic in every single recipe too. I'm going to add just a little bit more oil here. But garlic, in terms of just in general, it's one of my favorite ways to flavor food. Calorie-free, sodium-free, fat-free, and it just gives so much flavor to food. Now in Asian foods, you can do ginger as well. You could do different kind of chilies as well. Herbs and spices, those are all great ways to flavor Asian food. And trying to use those sorts of things more often versus the sauces, because like with soy sauce, they're not all as bad as soy sauce, but they're all going to be higher in sodium, some high in calories too. So like sweet and sour sauce or mandarin sauce, those tend to be a little bit higher in calories. If you are looking for lower calorie sauces to flavor with though, duck sauce, plum sauce, hoisin, soy, those are all good ones. Hot mustard. But in terms of the sodium, you still have to pay attention to that piece of it. All right, so we've got this cooking for a few minutes then. They're starting to get a little tender, so I'm going to go ahead and add in some mushrooms then. And the reason that we're kind of doing it step by step like this is because all these veggies cook, they take different amounts of time. So things like carrots and broccoli, those might take a little bit longer to cook than we've got onions and peppers. Celery, those sorts of vegetables, maybe some zucchini or squash, take a little bit less time, and then mushrooms don't take too terrible long at all. And then tomatoes, spinach, those take even less time. So just continuing to cook these until they kind of get a little bit tender here, which they're actually cooking pretty quick. And I'm going to actually add in my sauce now. Give it a little stir before I add it in. And then I'm also adding in some toasted almonds. So I have not been able to find toasted almonds actually bought in the store. So if you're wondering how to make those, there's a couple different kinds of ways that I do it, but I just typically will heat my oven to 350 and then put them in the oven for about 10 to 12 minutes until they just get a little bit of a golden brown. Don't let them get too brown because then they have kind of a burnt flavor to it. But those are optional in this recipe. Some people aren't fans of nuts, so you can totally omit those and it will still be a great recipe. And so the sauce is thickening up, so it takes just a minute or two for that to happen. And then after that, it's actually ready to go. So this one for a cup has about 130 calories in it, not bad at all. With both this and the fried rice, you can make both of these into main dishes if you want to. I would just add with either recipe about a pound or a pound and a half of chicken. You can do shrimp, edamame, tofu if you wanted to. Any of those would turn it into a great main dish, but I kind of like the way all of this fit together, so I kept it as is. So again, you can see these were all pretty easy recipes. I got them all done in 25 minutes? Granted, I kind of had everything put together, but tack on another 10 and you can have dinner ready very, very quickly, and it could be healthy. The one thing I will admit that as hard as I tried to cut out the sodium, if you put the meal together, I think it still has about 950 milligrams, so a little bit on the high side, but like I said, you can cut back a little bit on the soy sauce in a few different areas. You can get it a little bit lower or mix and match. You can always sub in a little bit lower sodium item in place of one of the others too. Okay? Does anybody have any other questions for me?
Why do you let the rice cool down for the fried rice?
I think it kind of gets sticky and gummy, actually. That's my personal thing. In terms of the science behind it, I can't tell you, but for me, anytime the rice gets too hot or cooks too long, it just gets sticky and gummy. And so by doing that, it works really well. And then the oil that's in it helps keep it separated too. I don't know, does anybody else know any good reasons for why to do it? So we'll stick with Miles.
Do you know anything about oyster sauce in Asian cooking?
Oyster, I believe, is a better option. In terms of sodium, I can't tell you how that is, but I know it's a lower calorie one. Anybody else?
Could you do the same recipe with like pork or chicken breasts or
Definitely.
substitute a different meat?
Yeah. Oh, you definitely could. Yeah. There's a lot of, if you just like do a Google search for Asian pork tenderloin, there's tons out there. And pork tenderloin is one of the leanest meats out there, so it would be perfectly fine. Yeah, it'd be great. Anybody else? Yeah, actually they do. I am a big fan of Smart Chicken. I know you pay a little extra for it, but they do so much of the work for you. Like I said, taking the bones out, taking the skin off, trimming the fat down. And I think that the way that they actually, I don't want to say kill the chickens, but the way that they do is actually in a way so that it's a little more humane than what some other places might do, but also it prevents the chicken from tensing up, and so the meat's typically more tender. And no, they're not paying me to give that pitch. I just really, I like the Smart Chicken. However, when I was checking, because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough Smart Chicken thighs. There are other brands that I saw that they would have this chicken thighs in there. You might have to take the skin off or take the bone out, one or the other. But they'll still work great in this recipe. So just make sure you take the skin off before cooking so that the flavors get absorbed into the meat. And yeah, just make sure you're tempting your meat. But they're pretty widely available. I just need like 60 of them, so that's why I was calling all the grocery stores in town. So they hooked me up.
I know Sam's.
Do they? Okay. Okay, so any Sam's members then?
And it's frozen opposed to fresh, is that correct? Or?
These were fresh. If you do the frozen, just be careful, whether it's thighs or any kind of chicken, you do want to double check the labels because a lot of times they will be injected with a sodium solution to help kind of plump them up. And they can be very high in sodium. So I actually have done some comparisons, and there are some that just are sky high. I mean, days worth of sodium almost in a piece, and then some that might be, you know, just a few hundred milligrams. But another, you know, if you don't want to do the frozen, you can always, you know, if there's a meat sale, buy the fresh, and then you can kind of buy it in bulk and then freeze it until you're ready to use it then too. So, and then you're not having to add all of those fillers to it. Anybody else? Yes.
What store did you find that by spice?
That's at Super Saver. That was in their ethnic aisle. I was at Walmart first and did not have any luck there. I am sure Hy-Vee would have it because their selection is amazing. So yeah, okay, so. And you guys can come and look at this if you're interested in it. If you don't like black licorice, don't smell it, but you can look at it. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna, if you guys are still hungry, please eat the food. So I'm gonna take it back here with me. And then I'll just